Welcome to Full Speed Ahead for a very special talk here at the Carrier Summit. I'm here with Pervinder, the CEO of Blume Global. Pervinder, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
It's an interesting time, lots going on. You have a perspective on the global freight movement, but also you're rolling out something today at Blume on the domestic freight. I'd love to get into that, but Blume is a business that's actually quite large that perhaps a lot of folks in the freight industry may not be aware of. I'd love to hear the foundational story of Blume Global, how you came about. It's a relatively young company, but actually quite large and a big participant in the market.
So we founded Blume or launched Blume in 2018, but it had a long history, as you mentioned. Over the years, in 90s, there were two different companies that came about. One was called Reg 1, which stood for Reservation System 1, working with the US railroads, primarily founded by UP and NS in 1994 to serve as an independent software company and to manage EMP pool, grew to have kind of the UMAX pool. There was another company out of Oakland, again founded in 97, focused on the marine and air side of the business. So in 2018, I joined, and these companies were part of DCLI and owned by a private equity firm. I joined to spin it out as an independent software company called Blume. And that's how we were formed, but we have a history and customers. I think our longest serving customers, we celebrated 25 years with UP and NS last year. So it's now year number 26. So it's a long history from that perspective. Same for kind of companies like ONE and others who have been customers for well over 10 years now.
Now, DCLI is in the chassis business, a lot of focus on port and intermodal traffic. Owning Res 1 gives you an opportunity to work with the railroads. You really have been at the intersection of intermodal dray and global freight movements. But today you're announcing an over-the-road trucking TMS, or operating system, I should say, because as I've understood it, it's not just a TMS, it does a lot more than that. What exactly is this new product that you guys are rolling out?
Sure. I think the other part, just to kind of complete the story, we also have a big footprint in international air cargo. And we have seen that a huge jump in it. So intersection of anything international, intermodal, and where they meet the surface is where we have been. And this product, Carrier Go Premium, is really targeted for trucking companies to manage their entire business. The way we looked at it, kind of, as you know, we sit at the intersection of kind of all of these different modes. People are talking about digitization, right? But to be digital, you can't make a single company digital. You have to make the entire supply chain or entire logistics ecosystem digital. And as you know, 90% of the trucking companies worldwide have less than 30 trucks. So without having a platform which allows them to become digital, run their business on a digital operating system, it's not possible to make the larger ecosystem digital. So the launch we are doing today is targeted towards some of the smallest players in our industry, because we work with some of the largest retailers and shippers to people who own one or two trucks in there. For these smaller players, we are launching this product called Carrier Go Premium, which allows them to become digital and then be as good or equal to the platform that many large companies have.
Now, Carrier Go you've described it as a carrier operating system, essentially, that you're giving the carrier the ability to not just have what a TMS is known for, as dispatching and billing and managing the workflow of the transaction. What I understand with Carrier Go is it goes much further. It's providing an accounting system as well as a CRM. So what exactly are the features that you have inside of Carrier Go?
Sure. So I think if you, as you said rightly, kind of you have to start off with that, how do I run my business, which means that how do I manage my customers? And so we start talking about the CRM, That which companies do you work with, which platform or networks are you connected with. That's part one. All the regular features of a TMS or a dispatch system are part of the system, going all the way to kind of maintaining your rates, figuring out how do I bid a particular rate, either as a spot rate or kind of or doing your own contractual rates, is all part of it. Other thing we have done is that there's a mobile app which is available, which goes to the drivers, and you're able to stay in constant touch with your drivers. Many of our trucking companies are now using that to do things like getting an electronic signature or a POD or geofencing to know where the freight is, where the trailer is or the container is, and how do I go manage kind of all of the assets. So it's a comprehensive platform. Go ahead.
So there's other TMSs that are in, on premise. There's TMSs that are in the cloud. Where do you guys? It's all in the cloud, as I understand. How is it different? Where do you feel like the big differentiator is between what you're offering at Blume and perhaps what's out there already?
Sure. So I think one has been that many of those TMSs were designed for larger companies. So I've been building TMSs now almost 20 some years in my career, kind of, and then it always started off with that they were designed for more kind of much larger companies to begin with, and they were not integrated in the fashion that we have integrated it as an operating platform with your customer facing component, with your kind of accounting and billing components. How do I manage my drivers? So we just took a grounds up look of that kind of, if we were to design a TMS in 2018, right? Not in kind of 2000 or not in 2010, how would we design it using Google Cloud as the foundation? And that's what we use as a foundation, where you're actually an operating system which works across the network. So on the platform today, we have over 10,000 companies. So it's a TMS which instantaneously kind of integrates you into all of the shippers or ocean carriers or railroads that we may be working with. So these are just very different way of looking at a TMS or an operating platform than what others have done in the market.
So I'm curious, you say integrated. What does that exactly mean for the carrier itself?
So we'll take an example without naming kind of who our customers are, right? Say if you are a trucking company and then stay on the dray side, every ocean carrier might want you to do invoicing in a different format. Every ocean carrier might tell you that these are the different fields you have to collect. This is kind of what the process is. On top, you add the freight forwarders. They have their own set of rules and their own set of systems. Then you add kind of your intermodal companies. They, again, dray carriers are serving kind of the rail intermodal as well. They may have their own set of rules. So what we do is that we will say that if we have done an integration with the top 5 IMCs or top 5 ocean carriers or top 5 LSPs, you know how to work with them out of the box, right? Out of the box, from how to receive an order from them and how to send them invoices or how to give them real time visibility. It's all standardized. So you don't have to do any kind of system implementation, any other integration. You sign up, you start working with the platform already knows that how you can work with your customers and what their requirements are.
So those integrations are done. You're not actually having to go out and build those integration maps and spend tens of thousands of dollars in EDI payments to set up. Is that essentially the way you think of it?
Yeah, and I think it also is that if you think of, if you're a small company, you couldn't really do EDI. And so we had one customer which we rolled out this year, works with about 900 trucking companies in US. Out of 900, there were only about 100 some which were EDI capable, because rest of them didn't really have the EDI capability. Now, if you're on the Blume platform, you can be a one truck owner and you can have EDI capabilities out of the box. And that's how kind of the best way to look at it, that now because you're on the platform, you have the same capabilities that the larger players would have had.
Yeah, I had before I started this business, actually had started a small trucking freight related company, and we used the TMS, an out of the box TMS, a cloud based TMS, but it didn't have billing integrated, so you had to use QuickBooks, and then couldn't get the data flow of trying to migrate the data was very difficult. The integrations and tracking of trying to get EDI or API, the organization couldn't handle that. It's a very difficult process, and it was interesting because there's not a lot of options for small carriers. The carriers at the time I was doing this, in mid 2015, 16s, the choice was either an on-premise system that was very expensive for a startup, or a cloud-based system that was very feature-starved and was built basically to do some very basic functionality, but anything you want to do above that was not built for that.
Yeah. And I think part of which is what I meant by 2018 technologies, right? So with new platforms, and I won't go too much into the technical side of it, but with microservices, how do I go and piece together things that you don't need a big bulky TMS as an operating platform for a smaller company? Because the other piece that comes in, Craig, is that these TMSs, they were many times designed by scientists for scientists, meaning that you had to be an expert at how do I go use it. So if you're a small company and you had a turnover or the drivers, it was not very easy to use. So the ease of use has been another thing that we're very focused on, that how you can be up and running as quickly as you can possibly be on something like a LinkedIn or something like Facebook.
I mean, the great thing about the cloud, especially in a COVID world, or I don't know if we're in COVID world or post-COVID world, whatever we're at, it's certainly still happening. But in this new world that we're in, having access to cloud technology gives you the agility to respond to what's ever happening. And I think, certainly what COVID has sort of thrust upon us, whether we wanted it or not, is this need to build cloud, to build our business in the cloud. And I know a lot of large corporations are actually struggling to move their traditional systems into the cloud. And some of the newer companies actually have some advantages. And what you're talking about is you're going to give those advantage to small carriers because they can actually launch their operating system, really, really quickly.
Yeah. I think you hit on something about even the larger companies. But the big issue that has been out there is the data, and the data around things like location. Right? So if you are delivering to a Walmart DC or an Amazon DC or some a particular retailer's DC, those DCs don't really change. And many of these TMSs, even on premise, were designed around that you spent actually half your time implementing just the master data. And what we have done is that we said single instance, all the master data is already there. Right? So you don't have to go worry about that which tail terminal am I going to. You don't have to worry about which DC am I going to or a manufacturing location am I going to. Right? We are enabling all of that. That master data setup should not be required in an industry like ours, which is very static. It takes a lot of money to go build a new DC or a new manufacturing location.
Pervinder, you struck something with me. So I worked for a large trucking company and in the family, and I won't go any further than that. But 20 years ago, I'm dating myself. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you would have the same location could have been entered 6, 10, 20 times, same exact address. It's just that there was a character, somebody had a fat fingered a number, or had, in those days, lowercase and uppercase would create a new record. And the data integrity element was frustrating. And the problem is we live in an industry where you're literally making money on, your margins are measured in pennies, and your ability to have an error, because you're talking about physically moving product and physically moving assets. If you give them the wrong address, or you don't have integrity to that, you're going to cause a lot of frustration on the driver, but B, you could potentially cause a lot of operational issues with service and more cost by not having that precise. So having access to this much larger data that has been cleansed and is far more accurate and reflective of what's actually happened is a huge advantage for a small company. They don't have to deal with what I had to deal with in my
Mhm.
past life.
But just take a step further, right? So then you have to know, how do I make appointment at each of those locations, right? So we are enabling that we know how to make appointments at every location there is, so you don't have to go learn in there. And
Now,
over time,
is the
go
appointment
ahead.
scheduling automated, or is it just have essentially the directory on how to actually go about it?
It's both. So many of the locations where it is automated, and we will continue to invest in making sure that we automate it. We are automating it, right? Or where it is not automated, if you have to know how to go make an appointment, that information is available to in the system to every participant, right? But otherwise, trucking companies, if there were 100,000 trucking companies, each one of them is trying to figure that out on their own, and that's the information that needs to be in digital form, right, including automation of it. And that's kind of where we see a huge value going forward, that it's not only about the, and then I talk about that the traditional world was more about technology. The today's world, in our world at Blume Global, is a combination of data, and we have kind of now 26 years of history. So there are a lot of data, a lot of location data, a lot of places we have been to or our customers been to that we know, right? It's about the network, that how do you connect to the network seamlessly, so you're not reinventing how to do EDI every time around, or APIs, or any other things, and technology. So it's really the combination of those three things is how you get kind of the new operating platform
So when you
from
think,
us.
so one of the things that I'm curious about, I'd love to get your thoughts, is some of the large steamship lines, Maersk has came out and said this recently, they want to be much more than just a container company, a container ship line. They want to move into really servicing all legs of the transportation, door to door. And I'm curious, do you think that's upon us, or is that a ways off?
Sure. So I think I will give you kind of that. In the end, I spent a few years with Hewlett Packard, right? So if I think from my BCO perspective or a shipper perspective, someone is going to do the door move, right? Either I can have kind of an ocean liner do the door move, or I can have a 3PL or a dray carrier do the door move. The reality is that ultimately all these moves are for supply chain, so they need to be managed that they're seamless, kind of from origin to destination. The ocean carrier side, we see kind of a divergence now, right? So some ocean carriers want to do the door moves, right, and some kind of want to shy away from the door moves, and the lines are blurring between what's a 3PL or a freight forwarder and what's an ocean carrier to some extent. So I think it's both models are going to exist for a long time, right? Because companies think they have different core competency. So not commenting on kind of merge themselves, right? And some of them have a core competency in managing the port to port and managing the terminals, and others want to expand into it. So it is real. You're going to see many ocean liners do door moves, but again, depends on in which countries. Today we are in 133 countries. I will tell you, kind of, we are in India now for years, or we are in China or Japan or Indonesia. In some of these countries, just the door moves means something different than what it means in kind of Western Europe or in US. As you know, even between US and Mexico, there are major differences on how motor carriers work and how moves actually happen. So it's a journey for anyone who's trying to get into the space.
I mean,
So
so
it will take a while.
what is I think about the fact that this industry is going through rapid digitization. You and I talked prior to when the cameras started rolling about the fact that you've been in the freight technology, or freight tech, if you will, for 20 years or more so than that. You've seen sort of this generational element where there was sort of the internet early days businesses. We then moved into sort of mature but still on-premise computing systems that had, massive scale. And then we're into cloud, and it seems like we're cloud and digitization of venture capital sort of emerging on the same sort of macro themes. I'm curious from your perspective, where does this all end up? What's the outcome here?
Yeah, I think maybe I would go back a little bit further, even before I probably even went to school. It kind of the supply chain got broken up into multiple silos. Like we had supply chain planning, sourcing, manufacturing, deliver, which is where logistics fits in. And so people took supply chain where it's a end-to-end process, broke it up into multiple pieces because compute power used to be low, right? And you couldn't really think of the whole problem, right? Kind of in the same way that we can now and in few years from now. And which is why kind of if you look at our other side of the business, our focus is on this supply chain orchestration. So that digitization is eventually to have all of the silos of supply chain work well with each other. How I plan, how I manufacture, how I deliver. Because in the end, it's all around kind of how your products are consumed. It's about the consumer, whether it's a business consumer or a person too. But these things have to come together. So our view is that if you think of a digital platform or a digital supply chain platform, the end goal is orchestration of supply chain across a large ecosystem. Logistics is part of it. But I think logistics and supply chain planning will converge in the next 2 to 3 years. Because in many cases, kind of the merchandise planning or supply chain planning and logistics, there's a huge overlap between the decisions we make on one side or the other. And as we become more and more digital, and I will use COVID as an example, correct? Right? So when I was at HP, we used to have these major disruptions about once a year. If you go back even to 2009, 10, right? So we had volcanoes in Europe in 11 where no airplanes could fly. So we had a disruption then. Then we had a disruption like floods in Thailand, or we had earthquake in Japan, kind of which caused disruption. There was a factory for memory kind of in Seoul, which had a fire, which caused this disruption. Last 5 months, we have seen all of them on a weekly basis. And what this has again brought together is that how do you go deal with supply chain orchestration? How do you be resilient? How do you reconfigure your supply chains kind of very rapidly? And that's kind of where I think we are headed.
It's 2020. I mean, there's a lot of memes on the internet about 2020. I think we had what was it, killer bees or something.
Yep.
That
Yeah.
was there. Meth gators was another one. But it is, 2020 has been an insanely chaotic year for everybody, for society. And then just supply chain. And I've said this, and I say this daily when people ask, is supply chain and supply chain intelligence, logistics and logistics intelligence has taken the front seat inside of every corporation that has any type of physical goods movement. Is they have to be concerned about what's happening to their physical supply chain in ways that they didn't worry about. In fact, when you go back and look at earnings calls and you track the word supply chain or logistics, CEOs on these earnings calls are consistently talking about it. And there's been a surge of that conversation around supply chain, either good if you're in grocery, you're just concerned about the issue, or if you're a manufacturer, what's happening to your product? Where is it at? Are you able to get people to manufacture it employed? Are they showing up at work? And where is the raw material? All those things are coming, are coming here. But the good news for us in the industry, like what you guys are doing at Blume and others in this industry, is there's a chance to really accelerate the technology implementation. And I think that's important. But it also seems to me that if companies aren't implementing digitization as a core part of their go-to-market, they're likely going to be left behind.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of, it's now a necessity, digitization or digitalization, right? And for years, we thought it was a luxury too. So for anything, 2020 has proved that you have to be digital. Just imagine who wants to handle paper now when we want to be socially distancing from each other, right? So you don't want that piece of paper. So years of talking about electronic bill of lading, right? Now finally it is that, okay, if it's not electronic and you have to hand it over from person to person, uh,
I don't even
the
want
world
to
has
see. I don't even want to. I don't want to be near you. I don't want to be like. That's where we're
Yeah.
at. Is we're in a situation where we really, really want digitization. We want to be
Yeah.
to have a digital experience, it's changing. I think this was ultimately going to happen, but we've had 10 years of technology evolution and culture evolution compressed in 2 months. Sounds like what you guys are doing with your Carrier Go product at Blume Global is right time and hopefully right product for the market.
We think kind of there's a huge potential for it, and again, I think we targeted the product not just for US, for all the countries that we are in. Right? So I think, as I mentioned before, 130 some countries too, and there's an applicability of the product kind of around the world.
I mean, you guys are huge. Is there an IPO ahead of you?
Potentially, right? So you can never really predict, right? So, but our plan has been that this can be a large independent cloud software company in supply chain space for decades to come, and we think kind of in the next couple of years. Depends on the public markets and depends on how we do, but everything is possible.
Maybe we'll see a SPAC filing. That seems to be the new hot thing to do, is take the company SPAC. Well, Pervinder, I really appreciate you being here today. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for participating and sponsoring here at the Carrier Summit. We're certainly excited about the work. Digitization is really important. It's awesome what the cloud has done in terms of democratization of technology, giving the ability for the smallest carriers, the smallest participants of the market to have access to tools that are frankly more advanced in many ways than some of the traditional legacy technology. I know that in media, we have partnerships and we talk to a lot of media and television broadcast companies, big cable networks. And one of the things that we found is they're actually in some ways jealous of the setup we have here in our video and technology, because we bought ours in the last 3 months and they've owned theirs for 20 years. And so they're dealing with a lot of legacy technology. It's the great thing about this is what you're doing at Blume is that you can actually leapfrog a lot of those old errors, like you talked about having address verification and data integrity. Those things are really cleansed in a way that makes it turnkey for a small player. Pervinder, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Craig. Thanks.
Yeah, and thank you for tuning in to the Carrier Summit. We have a lot of content. We have a lot more to come. Also, just in the next couple of months, we've got a series of conferences that are going to talk about all aspects of freight transportation and the supply chain, ranging from our industrial real estate conference that we're partnered with Prologis, all the way to outer space. That's right. We're doing FreightWaves in December to talk about the intersection of space commercialization and logistics. So tune in for that, along with the rest of the schedule. You can find it on FreightWaves.com. Thanks for being here.